as I think all of you know, because we've talked on frequent occasions, I think one of the great mistakes of the Obama years was overregulation. We had a tutorial over the last 8 years of what not to do if you want to have economic growth. Not a single year 3% growth in the whole period. So in looking back and analyzing the lack of growth, it seemed to us that there were two principal causes of it. One was overregulation, and the other was the failure to address the tax code, which is increasingly uncompetitive in the global economy. So when the American people gave us an opportunity to turn the corner and go in a different direction, we've attacked the over-regulatory environment in the House and Senate by repealing 15 regulations through the Congressional Review Act. The President has put entirely different kinds of people at the SEC, at the NLRB, at the Food and Drug Administration, and so on across the federal government, who believe that regulations need to have a lighter touch if you're going to have the kind of growth and opportunity that the country needs. We had, however, to couple that up with comprehensive tax reform, and when we say comprehensive tax reform, what are we talking about? Making America competitive in the global economy was at the top of the list. Countries all over the world are lowering their tax rates in order to attract business, and regretfully have attracted a number of American businesses as a result of that. At 35%, we had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the industrialized world. And so getting those rates down and preventing the exportation of our jobs was one of the core principles that we wanted to pursue. Connected with that is, how do you tax overseas profits? We were the only major country that applied a domestic tax to an overseas profit. So we ended up having enormous amounts of money overseas that were not brought home because they were in effect double taxed. This is something, until President Trump got elected, that Democrats wanted to deal with as well. They seem to have lost their interest in it after the occupant of the White House changed. So that's what we wanted to do, is go to a territorial system so that profits are taxed where they're earned. And we wanted to recoup those overseas profits by having a repatriation, mandatory repatriation with an applied tax that would bring those profits home to be invested here in the country. At the same time, we wanted to benefit, in addition to providing jobs to the people in the middle class who are not enjoying that increased job opportunity that would come with normal growth, give them tax relief as well. And for the average family of four, you've heard all the statistics bandied back and forth, both sides trying to make their best case. But the fact of the matter is, the average family of four would get about $2,200 a year in tax relief, and that's pretty darn important to them. So summarizing this year for Senate Republicans, we've changed the Supreme Court for a generation. We're in the process of changing the circuit courts. To put that in context, Barack Obama, in the first year of his presidency, had 3 circuit judges confirmed. We've done 9 so far this year. We'll probably have 12 by the end of the year. We're busily at work, and I'm prioritizing in terms of what I choose to do in the Senate, because I get to make the scheduling decisions, confirming these judges to begin to change the federal judiciary. So I think that pretty well sums up our year, and I'll be happy to take a couple of questions. The budget that we passed allows a deficit of $1.5 trillion. To fill that gap over the next 10 years, the economy would only have to grow 0.4%. You know, I've never been somebody who thought you ought to be delusional about how much growth you get. But it's obvious that if you make the country more competitive, you get more growth. So the 0.4%, Al, growth figure is a very conservative estimate of what kind of growth you would get out of this kind of tax structure over 10 years. I not only don't think it will increase the deficit. I think it will be beyond revenue neutral. In other words, I think it will produce more than enough to fill that gap. And I'm not one of the total supply-siders who just believes that, you know, if you cut taxes no matter what amount, you turn out ahead. I'm not in that camp. I still believe in revenue neutrality for tax reform, and I believe this is a revenue neutral tax reform bill.
How difficult is it going to be to reconcile the Senate and to ask for?
That's a good question.
When do you think it'll get to the president?
I think there's a good chance it'll get to the president before Christmas. The bills aren't all that different. Just to give you an example, the original version we were considering the Senate would not have allowed any deductibility for state and local taxes. We decided, in order to come closer to the House bill, to put in the same $10,000 property tax credit that they put in the House bill. There aren't massive differences. There are some differences, and I think we'll be able to conference it and get to an agreement before Christmas. If you look at who pays taxes, it's almost impossible to do any kind of tax reform in which the people who pay almost all the taxes don't get some benefit out of it. But in the Senate bill, most of the really wealthy people I've run into don't think they're getting anything. We did not get rid of the estate tax. We took the top rate down, I think less than 1%. I haven't run into anybody during this whole tax discussion who's very successful who thinks they're benefiting from it. But I understand the talking points, and you all hear both of our talking points from both sides. But I think the best way to look at it, if you're going to have any kind of tax changes, the people who pay the taxes are likely to get more relief than others, but on a percentage basis. In other words, on a percentage of how much you're paying in taxes, as I said, the average family of four will end up $2,200 a year better off, and that's a lot of money for the average family of four. We have these reconciliation rules that are highly technical and difficult to comply with. I think the chances, 6 or 7 years in, that individual rates are going to go away, the lower rate's going to go away, is virtually nil. The reason it was important to signal that to businesses is that we want them to make investment decisions with certainty. This bill is largely about trying to deal with the growth rate. And the growth rate serves a multitude of purposes. It narrows the deficit, it produces jobs and opportunity. And I don't want to read too much in to quarterly growth rates, but it is noteworthy that we've had 2 straight quarters of 3% growth. And I think consumer confidence is way up. And look, a year or two from now, you guys can make an assessment. Which one of us was right? You know, the proof will be in whether or not the economy picks up and things get better. If all these dire predictions our friends on the other side are making come true, then you can say, I told you so. On the other hand, we would expect the same if things go well. Yeah, you know, I often get asked, you know, how was this exercise compared to healthcare? For one thing, I think almost everybody, including Senator Corker, who ended up in the end being more skeptical about the figure that in fact he negotiated, the 1.5 deficit figure was negotiated by Senator Corker, but he ended up in the end being skeptical enough about it that he was the lone vote that we lost. Everybody in my conference, from Susan Collins to Ted Cruz, wanted to get to yes. In other words, they thought this was important and worth doing, and we're not, even though, you know, certainly negotiated, and you watch that. I mean, in a 52-48 situation, every man is a king and every woman is a queen. And I had 47 people who were easily satisfied and 5 who weren't. And the 5 who weren't, as you watched, used their positioned skillfully and made a number of improvements in the bill. But I think everybody wants to get to yes. I can't imagine any compromise we could make in conference that would keep us from passing a conference report. The argument that this was not an open process is ridiculous. I mean, we had multiple hearings. The Democrats were there. They had an amendment process in committee. The Democrats offered tons of amendments. Sure, there were changes as we moved along, but the core of the bill, everybody was familiar with. All the Democrats were familiar with, all the Republicans were familiar with. And so the swan song last night in the middle of the night that somehow they haven't had a chance to read it, it was ridiculous because there were relatively minor changes to a core bill that everybody had had out for 2 weeks and that they had participated in hearings and markups on. So I know that it's important for you to use their talking points, but that was one of their more ridiculous claims. Reconciliation is regular order. I mean, they used it on Obamacare. I mean, it is a process allowed through the regular order of the Senate. That's what we followed. They had ample opportunity to participate. They were there at the hearings. They had opportunities to offer endless amendments, and they offered a bunch of them last night. And some of them could have voted for it if they'd chosen to. They chose not to. And their gamble is that this was a mistake for the country. We'll see. Well, Al, as I said earlier, we're going to find out, aren't we? But also, let me just say this about dividends. They go into IRAs, which have an impact on retirement. Almost any way this money is used is likely to produce a positive result for the country, regardless of what particular way any individual company decides to use it. And I think we'll find out here. But I think almost anything the company decides to do with the extra money will be good for the country. Either it will go into dividends, which will go into trust funds and teachers' retirements and other funds that help cushion the blows that we inevitably have as we move toward retirement, or they hire and invest. Well, we could sit here and speculate about this all day, but we're going to find out, aren't we? We'll see. You and I can have this conversation a couple of years from now. And, well, you know, one thing about being the leader of your party, you get a lot of slings and arrows, and there are potential opponents. But I think the best way to judge a campaign is how did it end, not how did it begin. It ended with me winning 118 out of 120 counties in the primary and 110 out of 120 in the general. I had an opportunity to make my case to the people of Kentucky, and I'll do that again. Thanks a lot.